Good evening and welcome to the Newshour Agenda. I'm Madhavdas G. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has presented the budget, outlining the government's roadmap for Badhta Bharat. A number of big announcements have been made that will have a bearing on our day-to-day lives. In this edition of Newshour Agenda, we will focus on those aspects of the budget which matter to the Aam Aadmi, to you and me. What gets cheaper and what gets costlier? What changes have been announced in the tax slabs and how changes in the capital gains tax will impact the people? Over the next 1 hour, we will discuss all this and we will also get insights from experts who were involved in the framing of the budget. First up, let's take a look at what will get dearer and what will cost less than before. So let's take a look at what's costlier as far as this budget is concerned. Plastic products is one category of products that are going to be costlier post this budget. The next item are telecom goods, which are going to in fact be more expensive. There's also solar glass that is used in the making of solar panels. As you can see, this is going to be costlier as well. Cigarettes are another category of items that will be costlier post this particular budget as well. Let's also take a look at what is really going to be cheaper post this budget. There are three categories of cancer medicines also. Gold and silver also stand to become cheaper post this particular budget after the announcements by the finance minister. Clothes and other kinds of accessories also likely to be cheaper as well. Electric cars, another category that is of course likely to become cheaper in this entire budget as well. So this is of course as far as the aspects of those items which are cheaper and which will be costlier. Let's take a look at the tax slabs and how the changes have happened as far as the new tax regime. Remember that if you're part of the old tax regime, then these changes don't apply. The new tax regime has been changed. The slabs have been changed to perhaps entice citizens to come towards the new tax regime. And while the 0 to 3 lakhs category remains nil in both the current as well as the previous versions, the bottom two versions also remain pretty much the same at 20 and 30%. That is the 12 to 15 lakhs and the 15 lakhs and above categories. It's these three categories that have seen a significant shift. Of course, only 1 lakh rupees, but still, of course, a very significant one. Earlier, it was 3 to 6 lakhs that had to pay 5%. Now, 3 to 7 lakhs who will pay 5%. 7 to 10 lakhs now have to pay 10%. Earlier, this category was 6 to 9 lakhs at 10% and 10 to 12 lakhs at 15%. Earlier, it was between 9 to 12 lakhs that 15% had to be paid. So, as far as this particular category is concerned, as well as the earlier two ones, there is a fairly significant shift in terms of the tax exposure of citizens when it comes to these categories.
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 1 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
For more on this, we have two very eminent guests joining us on the show this evening. We have KV Subramaniam, former CEA. Also with us is R. Jagannathan, who is editor of Swaraja. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening to try and break down the budget, because there's been a lot of analysis. There's been a lot of information that's been put out there. Is it all factual? Is it all real? What really are the common man of this country and common woman of this country to look at and expect from this budget? And let me start first and foremost, KV Subramaniam, with you when it comes to the entire issue of taxes, because that to the Aam Aadmi perhaps is the issue which they connect with the most. Now, with the finance minister having announced a relief in the revised new tax regime of about 17,500 of relief that is to go to the Aam Aadmi per year, and that this will benefit about 4 crore persons. There are those who are questioning whether this is really enough, whether more relief could have been given, whether the top slab of 15 lakhs could have perhaps been raised by another lakh or two to bring in more people who get relief as far as this particular new regime is concerned. How do you look at the new slabs and the new regime and this criticism?
So when we talk about the Aam Aadmi, I think I would not restrict myself only to taxes. If you remember, a small proportion of our population pays taxes, and therefore to say that taxes is only thing that Aam Aadmi cares about, is not right. In a population of almost 140 crores, a labor force of 60 crores, about 6 crore, 6 to 7 crore pay taxes. So that's 10%. That certainly is not the characterization of the Aam Aadmi. That's my first point to talk about. In fact, for the Aam Aadmi, opportunities to grow, opportunities to actually have jobs is far more important. I think that said, the and I'll come to employment, we can talk about that in more detail. But even from the perspective of, tax, I think what needs to be done, this is an area that needs significant work over time. It is that the professionals, people who are lawyers, chartered accountants, dentists, other doctors, etc., who run their own firms, these are the folks that don't pay taxes commensurate with their income. And I think that is an area that definitely needs emphasis. There's a lot of research that shows that these professionals, if, for instance, one looks at the loans that they get from the financial sector, from that you infer the actual income and look at the income that they actually, or the amount they pay in taxes, there's significant divergence. And as a result, the salaried class, people like you and me, end up having to sort of pick a large share of the burden on personal income tax. So that is something that I'll definitely concede. But I will also emphasize that this characterization of, Aam Aadmi as caring only about the income tax is certainly not the full story.
Well, I stand corrected there. Perhaps I should have used a better term, which is the middle class, which is, of course, such an ubiquitous term. It covers so many, levels of earning and salary across the country. But let me bring in Mr. Jagannathan, because Mr. Jagannathan, after every budget, the question that you hear the salaried class asking is, middle class ko kya mila? What would you say that, that question that is often, or the statement that's often made that middle class got nothing? Do you think that applies in the case of this budget? Yes or no?
I think it applies partly because I think there was some fiscal space to address some better tax savings, tax benefits here, which would have pushed up discretionary parts of things like, white goods, those kind of things, which would have helped. So in that sense, at the upper end of the purchasing scale, the benefits to this class would have certainly helped. The problem is that this class has not benefited in real terms for a different reason, because I think most of the things that this class buys, let's not take the normal CPI where it's largely food items and those kind of things. Okay, here your thing is you have EMIs, you have, telecom bills, data bills, all these things are going up steadily. And there I think you are actually not beating inflation with what you're getting. So I think some concessions could have been helped. But basically, I think it wouldn't have also been very costly. The last thing is, I think, the reason why the middle class makes an issue about this is exactly what KV pointed out, that there's a huge super middle class which pays practically no taxes. So the middle class that can't avoid paying tax is the only one on which you hung the whole tax burden on. It's like the middle class donkey with the bell running round and round, but those guys are run away without paying anything. So like your lawyers, chartered accountants, dentists, and a whole lot of guys who, and of course, a large part of the retail trade, it's still, despite UPI and all that, there is a substantial evasion of tax there. If that middle class really came into the tax bracket, then I think it would have been easier to justify the tax. To why the rest of the middle class is upset because of that.
Right. Let me bring in KV Subramaniam on another aspect, which is a lot of criticism that has been seen, and you would have perhaps also encountered that on social media, particularly as far as the capital gains tax is concerned. The removal of indexation seems to have caused some amount of worry, while the actual, percentage may have been withdrawn, and perhaps there are good enough reasons to do that. There was a very complicated structure in the past, so on and so forth. But, there are apprehensions that in the long term, it might be sort of hurtful to the asset owning class. How do you view this?
So first, let me build on the points that Jagannathan sir, I think, very rightly highlighted. If we look at the income tax code and the proposal that has been put by the Honorable Finance Minister for revising the income tax code, that is an area where, this aspect that we've spoken about, professionals, self-employed professionals and other proprietors who do not pay, taxes commensurate with their income, that is an area that needs to be, plugged. And I think here I would highlight it is because of the income tax code that we have. It's a 1961 Act, 83 years old, where there have been so many amendments, and many of these amendments actually are contradictory to each other at different points. points. And that is just a chartered accountant's dream to be able to use some of these provisions that will work at cross purposes to enable, some, sort of tax evasion or, tax decreases. I think this is an area that must be focused on. I will point out that, in 2019, a committee that I was part of, the Direct, Tax Code Task Force, actually had written a full new tax code with far less provisions, far less pages compared to the 1961 Act. I think building on that will really help to deliver an income tax code that is far simpler, with much less exemptions, much less, provisions itself. That is, I think, a sine qua non. Now, when we, and there is an aspect I think we need to speak about definitely, which is for me, the most important part of the budget, which is employment. I've consistently maintained that for growth to be inclusive, employment generation is incredibly important, because not only does employment, increase consumption by increasing income and reducing uncertainty of income. Employment is actually also important from just an identity perspective. Each one of us, when we actually look back in our lives, the first job that we got actually was such a big, impetus for us. And therefore, employment is really critical for inclusive growth. I think this budget will stand out for me in terms of the impetus that it has put on employment generation, along with skilling. And here as well, if we recall, those of us who have worked as interns, I remember before I went for my PhD, I actually interned with ICICI when I was doing my MBA. When you work with firms like that, you end up, learning by doing, and that skill can be translated into other firms to become, quite attractive for other firms as well. So the combination of employment and skilling, I think, is what will really stand out for me, in this budget. Of course, the removal of the angel tax, I think, will really help the entrepreneurial ecosystem that has been doing very well. I want to see the contours of the proposal on the financial sector that the Honorable FM talked about. I think, that as a financial economist, I maintain that is one area we really need to focus further on. Just to give one statistic, if you look at in the last 6 decades, 1960 to 2020, in 1960, India's private credit to GDP ratio was 8%. South Korea's was 6%. In 2020, South Korea's private credit to GDP ratio is almost 180%, while we were still languishing at 58%. That highlights to you the importance of credit creation and the financial sector. So I think this is very important. I'm happy that, this is announced, but, the details are awaited.
Right. A lot of ground that you've covered there, KV. Let me quickly bring in Mr. Jagannathan on that. Let's go first as far as employment is concerned. I don't think there's any doubt about the fact that this is a very key issue. The very fact that, opposition made it a massive issue in this Lok Sabha election. There's even a fight over whether, these ideas were first proposed by the Congress or by the existing regime. And you'd have seen those comments coming in as well, Mr. Jagannathan. But, the very fact that you have a PLI scheme, a three-pronged PLI scheme, you have a massive expenditure that's happening as far as capex is concerned, which will not just create infrastructure, it will also obviously create jobs and also skilling at the same time. So this is perhaps the biggest push that we've seen in terms of jobs and the importance of it perhaps being realized by this government.
Absolutely. If there is a single thing that I say is the most important highlight of this budget, it's that it has an exclusive and very strong focus on jobs, skilling and things. And two related things like the new emphasis on urban construction and infrastructure, and also the MSME things. All these also add up to jobs, because MSMEs are where the maximum number of jobs will get created. And the same thing with startups also, because startups may last only 5 years, let's say. Because 8 out of 10 will fail. But during the 5 years that they are in business, they create far more jobs than, let us say, the biggest companies. Because biggest companies tend to automate. They tend to reduce the net, they increase the productivity of their capital and their thing. They don't tend to grow their employment too much. It's the middle and lower level things who created the jobs. Last two things I emphasize. I think it was mentioned in this year's survey. The thing is, we talk about reforms, and unfortunately we focus only on central sector reforms. It is the states don't do a damn thing. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, whether it was agriculture or labor, they could very well have done it, but they force the center to do it and then oppose it, saying, oh, you are anti-farm, you are anti-labor. I mean, it's easy politics to just ask somebody else to carry the can and then throw stones at them. This is it. The other thing is, there is a mistake in our constitution where we have a central list, a state list, and a concurrent list. What we don't have, and which is the real engine of growth, is the local bodies list. It is your urban areas that are going to be your fountainhead of jobs, and those guys are politically disempowered. So state governments use urban areas as a cash cow to feed their rural vote banks, rather than to create urban investments which create even more jobs, high quality jobs. So that is your problem, and you are not done that because you're not a single mayor is empowered. In fact, the only mayor who is empowered is called a chief minister, and he is now now in trouble for unrelated things.
Right. Very interesting perspective there. But let me put this question of LTCG to you, which I put to KV Subramaniam earlier. Do you think that it's a big storm in the teacup? Is it really a big issue? Is it really something that's going to help or hurt those who invest either in the markets or mutual funds or even in property? How do you look at it?
You ask me?
Yes, Mr. Jagannathan, question for you.
Yeah, so see, the LTCG ultimately has to move to some reasonable rate. Right now, what happens is the taxes on incomes are far, far higher than the taxes on capital. That is income earned from capital, whether it's in the share market or in any other place, it's actually much higher. So, I mean, that is why I think there is a reasonable move to make it a little higher, though it can't obviously be at the same income rate. So that it's a balancing, because once you make the taxes on capital much, much lower than that on labor income, or rather salaried income or whatever, then the incentive to use more capital instead of labor is higher. So as an economy as a whole, I'm not talking about any specific enterprise, but this is there. So I think a certain amount of increase is fine. And I hope it doesn't go too high. I think 12.5% is reasonable for the next 3 years. They should stay there. After that, we'll see how the tax fares and then figure it out. But 12.5% is not going to be a big deal breaker for most people. And also the tax on property has actually been lowered from 20 to 12, except that you lost indexation. So this will not affect property sold after 2 years, but it will affect, say, ancestral property. You got something for a song, and if you try to sell it today, even after with indexation, you would have paid very little. But without indexation, you may pay a bomb.
All right. Is that really going to be the big concern of many? Is of course a big question, but I want to bring in KV on one other important point, which is the significant reduction in corporate tax rate from 40% to 35% in terms of attracting further foreign capital, because this is something that has been announced as well. Do you see this making a very important announcement? Because there are those who will say that this has happened in the past, but it hasn't really yielded the kind of results that were perhaps expected. How do you see this?
So here, before I respond directly to that point, let me bring together a couple of, I think, important points that we've discussed, which is on, overall large firms, capital versus labor. I think it is really critical. And here I want to urge the industry bodies like CII, FICCI, ASSOCHAM, etc., that they need to take the onus on incentivizing, or at least talking about the need for labor-intensive growth. Because what happens here is oftentimes a problem of commons, where every firm, let's say, thinks that substituting, labor with capital will enhance productivity. But overall, when every firm does that, especially large firms, what that does is, you actually do not get enough job creation in the economy. With the emphasis that the government has placed on employment creation, I think the private sector, especially large firms, need to take a leaf out of this and look at when each firm will focus on more job creation, that will add together to the demand creation in the economy, and that will benefit as well. So I think they should not be myopic in the choices that they make, rather think about the overall contribution they make to the bigger economy. And here I think it is really important also to in this perspective look at the capital gains taxes rationalization. If you give far too much of an incentive on capital compared to labor, then you are effectively incentivizing capital in an economy which actually requires far more labor-intensive growth. And therefore, rationalization of this is something that should be seen in that particular light. So overall, I think when you let me just, can you remind me the question that you asked me? I'll respond to that as well, please.
No, I think I was asking you a similar question on, the LTCG, and also, of course,
yes,
other important questions that are, there as far as divestment is concerned, angel tax is concerned, custom duty. All of these, of course, are also some very significant announcements that have come in as far as this particular budget is concerned. And of course, the question that I was addressing to you is the reduction in corporate tax for foreign companies from 40% to 35%.
Correct. So here, I think it is important to look at if you would recall in 2019, just before COVID, the corporate tax rate was reduced. I think here it is important to look at the actual facts. Some commentators say that this has not led to adequate investment coming in. I think, the picture is far more mixed. If you look at the data, and, yesterday's economic survey has pointed out, in 2023, NSO data shows that private capital expenditure expanded by 19.8%. In 24, using Axis Bank research, which covers about 3,000 firms, both in the formal sector and in the informal sector, again, growth has been, is expected to be about 24%. So it is not fair to say that private capex, has not increased. It needs to increase further given the very healthy situation that corporate balance sheets are in. And I think I would urge overall, the capex to actually reach a level of about 40% of GDP. I think here the reduction seen in this light, reduction in the corporate tax rate for, FDI is also welcome, because do keep in mind that FDI brings in technology and thereby really helps our firms. I'll just give you the example of take Hero Honda as a joint venture that was started. Honda brought in the technology, Hero had the, Hero Cycles had the distribution network. After about 2 decades of working together, they went their separate ways, because now Hero Honda had the, Hero Cycles also had the technology. So this is an example of the kind of benefits that come from FDI, and therefore incentivizing that is really important for us, the economy, to upgrade technologically and thereby also produce enough growth in an inclusive manner.
Right. And Mr. Jagannathan, before I leave both of you, I'd like to ask you a simple question as far as the politics that have broken out now. There's a massive fight over whether there has been unequal distribution between the states, because big packages, big schemes announced for two states that are ruled by alliance partners of the center, that is, of course, the JDU and the TDP in Bihar and Andhra Pradesh respectively. We're even seeing opposition parties not just object but say that we're going to launch an all-out protest from tomorrow on the same. Is there something particularly peculiar about the manner in which this distribution has happened that merits this kind of opposition? Because many would say that in the past also there have been coalition governments and coalition as well as electoral concerns that have been factored into various budgets.
Yeah, I mean, see, obviously there are some political signaling involved in this, but both the cases actually merit substantially what was done. Take Bihar. It is the poorest state in the country, right? And if you are going to direct some central investment there, I can't see what is the moral objection there. More so since Bihar, Jharkhand and Bengal were biggest losers when we started this freight equalization policy in the Nehruvian era. Okay, so they to get some of the investment back is not a bad thing. Similarly, the bifurcation of the old Andhra, I think the rump state outside Telangana actually got a very rotten deal, and they didn't get the promised investment. So this was come because of that. These two guys happened to be allies of the BJP is fine. But the rest of the budget addresses everybody. I mean, jobs are not only for Andhra or BJP. And then there are, he called it what? Purvodaya. Purvodaya involves Jharkhand, it involves West Bengal and Odisha. So the entire eastern states will get benefit from those schemes. Then there are those flood schemes, which are expecting Himachal, Congress state. It will, of course, Uttarakhand will benefit and Bihar will benefit. So I think, and the general scheme of things is for benefiting everybody. And the fact that this fiscally conservative budget has managed all this is this is the eighth wonder of the world. And I think really must compliment the FM and the PM for bringing this out.
All right, Mr. R. Jagannathan, Mr. K.V. Subramanian, I'd like to thank both of you for joining us, for explaining this in very, very simple terms and breaking it down for our viewers as well. Pleasure to have you on the show this evening.
My pleasure.
Thank you much.